Okay, so welcome to this deep dive, into something you hear all the time, but you might not fully get, English swearing,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
think about it, whether it's navigating, a new country or getting hooked on that new streaming series or just chatting with people, really understanding swear words and, the ins and outs can really make a huge difference for you.
I mean, absolutely. Yeah. And it's not just about, knowing which words are bad.
Right.
There's a whole spectrum, a
Race.
fascinating spectrum of intensity.
Right.
And what gets a laugh in one place could cause serious offense,
Mm-hmm.
in another. And that's what we want to
Yeah.
kind of get into today.
Yeah.
So, our goal today is to give you the tools so you can confidently navigate, this linguistic landscape.
Right.
So you can understand swearing when you hear it.
Right.
And if you choose to use it yourself, you can use it more effectively and avoid those, awkward moments.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we're going to help you make sense of it all.
Okay, so you mentioned a spectrum. That makes sense because it's not like every swear word is, carries the same weight.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
So let's unpack this a little bit, this idea of like a hierarchy of heat.
Right.
Almost like we're turning up the temperature on the naughty meter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's start at the mildest end, what we might call like the grandma approved zone.
Okay.
Right.
Uh-huh.
These are your darns, your shoots,
Right.
your goshes.
Yeah, these are the ones where it's like you bump your elbow,
Exactly.
you slightly miss the bus.
Yeah.
You could probably say this in front of your grandmother and not cause a scandal.
No problem at all.
Right.
These express, little frustration
Yeah.
without any real sting.
Right, they're like the linguistic equivalent of a gentle tap on the wrist, you
Uh-huh.
know?
Yeah.
All right, so then we move up a notch
Yeah.
to the medium level.
Right.
This is like the workplace gray zone, as
Oh,
I
yeah.
like to think about it.
Okay.
We're looking at words like hell.
Damn.
Right.
Crap.
Yeah.
You might use these when your computer crashes for the 10th time today.
Exacts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or, something like that.
Yeah.
A little more risky in a formal email to your CEO.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
But if you're grabbing drinks with your team after work,
After hours.
after hours, you might get a raised eyebrow, but probably not a full-on,
Yeah.
you
And
know,
I'll write up.
reprimand.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Right.
Okay. And then things start to get a little spicy.
Yeah.
This is where you really need to know your audience.
Right.
This is where we're at words like ass,
Yep.
bitch, or dick.
Right.
You know,
Among close friends, these can sometimes even be used in a playful way, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
But imagine using one of those during a client presentation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that could have some serious consequences for you professionally.
Yeah.
All right, and then we reach the nuclear level.
Yeah.
This is where you really need to tread carefully.
Okay.
Yeah.
These are the heavy hitters.
Yeah.
We're talking about the F word, the C word, and of course, racial slurs.
Yeah, and these are, right, almost universally unacceptable in professional settings.
Right.
And many of them carry, a deeply offensive weight that you should be very aware of.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
it's crucial, to understand that these nuclear words often have a history of causing, significant pain and offense.
Right.
They're not to be used lightly,
Right.
if at all.
Right.
And understanding their impact is key to navigating social situations effectively.
Yeah. No, here's a really useful tip that we came across.
Yeah.
When in doubt, when you're unsure about the level of language, that's okay.
Yeah.
Take a moment and just listen to the people around you and mirror their usage.
Yeah.
For example, you might hear bloody used quite casually in Australia,
Yeah.
almost like saying really or very.
Right.
But if you use that way in the US, it could sound quite dramatic
Oh.
or even aggressive to some people. So pay attention
Right.
and then speak.
That's excellent advice because as our sources emphasize,
Yeah.
swearing is truly a cultural minefield.
Yeah.
What might seem like a relatively mild word, in one English-speaking country
Mm-hmm.
can be quite shocking
Yeah.
in another.
Yeah.
So let's look at some specific examples
Okay, let's do it.
so you can get a better feel for this.
Definitely. Let's start across the pond in the UK.
Yeah.
All right, you might hear someone say bollocks,
Yeah.
which can mean nonsense, like
Right.
that's a load bollocks.
Right.
But just be aware that it also literally refers to testicles.
Yeah.
So the tone you use can really change the meaning.
You can. Yeah.
And a word that can definitely trip you up is pissed.
Yeah.
If someone in the UK says they're pissed, it means they've had one too many to drink.
Right.
But if you use that word in the US, You're saying you're angry.
You're angry.
It's a big difference.
Big difference.
That could lead to some funny or perhaps awkward misunderstandings.
Yes, indeed.
Right.
And the C word, while it's become unfortunately more prevalent in some parts of the UK, compared to the US,
Yeah.
it's still generally considered, highly offensive
Yeah.
in most contexts.
Right.
So while you might hear it occasionally,
Uh-huh.
it's certainly not a word you should be throwing around casually.
Yeah, no, if you hop over to the USA, be careful with the word fanny.
Oh, yeah?
In the US, it simply refers to your backside.
Right.
But if you use that word in the UK, you're talking about something entirely different.
Yeah.
And much more vulgar.
Yeah.
Definitely one to keep out of your vocabulary.
Unless you want to raise some eyebrows for the wrong reason.
Yeah, for all the wrong reasons,
Yeah.
right? And then there's bitch in the US,
Right.
which is interesting because its meaning really depends on how it's used.
It does, yeah.
You might hear close friends playfully call each other, you bad bitch,
Yeah.
almost as a compliment,
Yeah.
but said in a different tone or context, it can be incredibly hurtful.
It can.
So the relationship and the way it's said are key.
That really highlights, how even within the same country,
Yeah.
the tone and the relationship between speakers can really alter the meaning and impact of a word.
Right.
Now let's head down under to Australia.
Okay.
Here you might be surprised to hear the C word used relatively commonly among close friends.
Yeah.
However, and this is a very important however,
Right.
it's almost never acceptable
Right.
in a professional setting.
Right. So very different.
Yeah, very different.
And bugger in Australia often just means, oh no.
Right.
Like if you drop your phone, you might say, oh, bugger.
Yeah.
But in the UK, it carries a mildly sexual connotation. So again, same word, very different vibes, depending on where you are and who you're talking to.
We even heard a listener story that perfectly illustrates these cultural pitfalls.
Oh, really?
Someone working for a British boss in Australia tried to be, friendly and said, cheers, mate,
Right.
which the boss took in stride, even laughed.
Yeah.
But then they followed up with, no worries, CNT. And let's just say HR definitely had some worries.
Oh, no.
It's a clear example of how, a cultural misunderstanding with swearing can lead to real-world consequences.
Oh, yeah. So really paying attention to these cultural differences is absolutely key.
It is, yeah.
But even within a single culture, knowing when it's okay to swear
Right.
is just as important.
Yeah.
It's all about reading the room, as our sources point out.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are definitely okay when scenarios.
Right.
For example, if you're hanging out with friends and they're already using swear words freely,
Mm-hmm.
it's generally acceptable to match their level
Yeah.
if you feel comfortable. Or if you're genuinely, very frustrated.
Right.
Say you've just locked your keys in the car on a rainy day.
Oh, yeah.
A well-placed, damn it, might feel like a natural and understandable expression.
Right.
And in creative contexts like comedy or writing.
Yeah.
Swearing can be used for emphasis or humor.
Right.
Like that great example. He was as useful as a screen door on a submarine.
Right. Adds a certain punch.
It does, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
But then, of course,
There are the never okay when situations
yes. Tell me about it.
to be mindful of.
Uh-huh.
First impressions are huge. Think job interviews or first dates.
Oh, yeah.
You probably want to keep your language, as clean as a whistle in those situations.
Right.
Also around kids or older relatives.
Right.
Unless you know their specific tolerance and you're prepared to be that person,
Right.
it's generally best to avoid swearing.
Yeah. And definitely not in customer service.
Oh, no.
Can you imagine someone saying, sorry for the wait, you fucking legend?
Yeah, not a good idea.
Not a good idea.
No.
Right.
And there's a golden rule that really sums it up well.
Okay.
If you wouldn't say it to your boss's mom,
Mm-hmm.
it's probably best not to say it at all.
Yeah. That's good advice.
It's a good general guideline, to help you err on the side of caution.
Yeah. So beyond just knowing which words to maybe avoid,
Uh-huh.
in certain company,
Yeah.
there's also a real art to swearing creatively, isn't there?
There is, yeah.
It's almost like a more sophisticated way to express yourself
It is, yeah.
than just, dropping the same few harsh words all the time.
Absolutely. Well, anyone can just shout an expletive.
Right.
Being inventive with your language,
Right.
even when you're frustrated,
Uh-huh.
can be much more effective and even humorous.
Right.
Think about playful insults.
Okay.
Things like, you're as sharp as a marble.
Oh,
or,
sure.
I've met rocks with more charisma.
Right.
These can get a laugh.
Right.
Without actually being offensive to anyone.
Or what about those frustration substitutes? Instead of using a really strong swear word when you're annoyed,
Right.
You might say something like, son of a biscuit.
Yeah.
Or holy guacamole.
Exactly.
You know, that they get the feeling across
Yeah.
without using actual curse words.
Right.
And then you have the almost swears.
Uh-huh. These are those phrases that sound very close to actual swear words,
Right.
but are just a little bit milder. Like,
Yeah.
what the fudge?
Yeah.
Or shut the front door.
Right.
They can be a good way to express, surprise or annoyance in a relatively safe way.
And a pro tip that we found was that often the longer and more absurd the substitute phrase,
Yeah.
the funnier it can be.
Yeah.
Think mother of pearl.
It
It
does.
just has a certain comedic timing to it.
It shows that you're consciously choosing your words,
Right.
even when you're feeling, strong emotions,
Right.
which can be quite engaging for listeners.
Now, we'd like to issue a little challenge to you, our listener, this week.
Okay.
We're calling it the swear jar experiment.
Right.
It's got 3 parts.
Okay.
First, we want you to really pay attention to swearing.
Mm-hmm.
Start tracking how often native English speakers around you,
Right.
whether it's on TV shows, you watch your colleagues at work,
Yeah.
your friends actually use curse words.
Uh-huh. Second, we encourage you to test the waters a little bit.
Okay.
Try using one mild swear word, something like, damn.
Yeah.
Maybe just a casual, damn, this traffic is terrible.
Yeah.
In a setting where you feel, relatively comfortable and safe.
Right.
And third, take a moment to reflect on how that felt.
Right.
Did it come out naturally,
Uh-huh.
or did it feel a bit forced?
Yeah. We even heard an example from someone who tried this.
Oh, yeah?
They used bloody hell with their British friend
Nice.
and got a high five in return.
High five.
They hashtagged it swearing win.
There you go.
So see how it goes.
This little experiment is really about helping you build your awareness and your comfort level.
Right.
If exploring this aspect of language is something you're interested in,
Right.
it's not about suddenly becoming someone who swears constantly,
Right.
but more about understanding the practical side of, what we've been discussing today.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, just remember that swearing in English is really a tool.
It is, yeah.
When it's used thoughtfully and in the right context, it can be a way to release tension, add humor, and even build connections with others.
Yeah.
But if it's used carelessly or without understanding, it can definitely lead to awkward or even offensive situations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as you continue to navigate the English language,
Mm-hmm.
we hope you'll consider the power and the subtle nuances that even these less polite words can hold.
Right.
Understanding these nuances isn't just about avoiding causing offense.
Right.
It can actually lead to much clearer communication
Right.
and a deeper appreciation for cultural differences.
Yeah.
Think about that, how even the words we're sometimes told we shouldn't say can offer a fascinating window into what a society values, finds taboo, and even finds funny.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Okay,
So until next time,
until next time,
happy swearing.
happy swearing.
I see ya.